Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started here in just a few minutes. We're going to let folks into the webinar. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning to our friends on the far west coast. Welcome to the U.S. Treasury Department's webinar on grant plan preparation and best practices for states, territories, and freely associated states. We appreciate you spending the next hour with us as we provide you with information and guidance to help you put together your grant plans and program plans. Treasury launched the Capital Projects Fund last fall with the release of the program guidance. We completed the application phase for states and territories under December 27th last year, with all 59 eligible states, territories, and freely associated states declaring their intent to receive these funds. A big thanks to everyone for signing and returning your grant agreements. We are countersigning those agreements now and sending a copy of the executed agreement back to you. So be on the lookout for those. You'll also be able to access those agreements in your application portal. Once you receive this verification from us that Treasury has countersigned, you can request payment for any administrative funds you ask for in the application. To help you all during the next phase of the CPF grant process, we put together this webinar to review the grant plan and program plan submission process and to provide some tips and best practices related to the development of your plans. Our agenda today will provide a brief summary of the Capital Projects Fund grant program and the eligible uses, which will be followed by a walkthrough of how to complete and submit the grant and program plans and instructions for requesting administrative funds. We'll also cover some best practices for completing your grant plan and program plans to provide you with some helpful hints and tips on submitting a plan that meets all of the guidance requirements. This will also help minimize questions that Treasury may have about your plans throughout the review process. A few reminders, we will be recording this webinar. We will not be asking questions live today, but we will answer any questions you submitted when you registered for the webinar, and any questions that you post in the webinar Q&A box, we'll respond to you via email. If you do have additional questions after the webinar, please contact your CPF outreach point of contact. That's Mo, Nicolette, myself, or Dana. Or you can send an email to capitalprojectsfund@treasury.gov. I'll put that link in our in the chat box. We'll do our best to respond in a timely manner. Before we get started, a few opening remarks from the director of the Capital Projects Fund, Joey Winder. Joey?
Thanks so much, Jeff, and thanks for everyone for being here today. I'm really excited to be talking with all of you today about what we're trying to do here is to recover from the pandemic and invest in capital assets that help with individuals across our country access job, educational, and health resources, really the critical services needed to fully participate in modern life. So thanks not only for being on this webinar, one, but two, for all the work you're doing to help support our recovery from the pandemic. So I want to give a brief overview in the background of the Capital Projects Fund. So if we could move on to the next slide. Great. So there it is. That's the Capital Projects Fund overview right there. The idea is threefold. It's one, it's to directly support recovery from the health emergency by strengthening our infrastructure with a particular emphasis on broadband to help with participation in work, education, and health monitoring. That's one. Two, it's to enable investments and assets designed to address inequities and access to those services. And finally, to contribute to the administration's goal to provide every American with modern infrastructure necessary to access critical services. And that particularly means high quality and affordable broadband internet. Next slide. Great. So the team has already made tremendous strides to get to where we are today. As I'm sure most of you are well aware, we published our initial guidance back in September, and we updated we published a frequently asked questions in November, and then we did an update of them last month. The tribal application portal opened in October, and we sent in all states, we're proud to say all states and territories did submit their grant plans by the December, not their grant plans, excuse me, their grant agreements by the December 27 deadline of last year. And so the good news is we've sent all the grant agreements out to states and territories, and they've all been returned to us. So congratulations to everybody on this call. We're in the final stages of finalizing just a few of those, but for most of you, they've been fully executed and your admin funds are now available, which we'll get to more in a little bit. So what are the upcoming milestones? One is we're reviewing and approving grant and program plans as we speak. The deadline for states and territories and freely associated states is September 24th. And for tribes, it's June 1st to get us your applications. Next slide, please. All right, so we're briefly going to talk about the use of the funds. So next slide. All right, so these are probably the two most important, I'd like to think these are two of the most important slides of the presentation. One is every project has to meet the following criteria. It's got to, one, directly enable work, education, and health monitoring. That's not an or, that's an and. Second, it's got to be designed to address a critical need that resulted from or has been exacerbated by the pandemic. And third, it's got to address a critical need in the community. And so there are three presumptively eligible uses of our funds. The first is broadband technology, broadband projects. The second is digital connectivity technology projects. Think laptops, computers, public Wi-Fi. Third, it's multi-purpose community facility projects. And then we have a case-by-case review process if you don't fit neatly into one of those three buckets. And so next slide, please. So the use of funds. So I want to emphasize a few points here as states are starting to submit their grant and program plans to us. When we're talking about broadband infrastructure, it is required that you're designing build standards for broadband that meets 100 by 100 symmetrical. So that is not an encouragement, that's a requirement. 100 by 100 symmetrical, unless impracticable. And what we'll explain to you here is if you believe that if you believe it's impractical to build to those speeds, either because of geography or extreme cost, it is required of states and territories and tribes to explain in detail why that is the case. So I just want to make sure we're all clear on what the not just the goals, but the requirements are of the program. It's 100 symmetrical. Second, subrecipients must participate in the ACP or some comparable subsidy program. That's the affordability program that the FCC has rolled out. And subrecipients should also be providing a low-cost option so that families in need can afford the service. Finally, we're encouraging prioritization of broadband networks owned or operated by local governments, nonprofits, or co-ops. And community consultation, engagement, and feedback are really essential. And we need information and data on how the funds will be used to address critical needs of the community served. Thank you, everybody.
Great, thanks, Joey. Now we're going to turn it over to Nicolette, who's going to go through our grant plan and program plans and give you some instructions on how to complete those and throw in some hints and best practices for you. Thanks, Nicolette.
Yep, thanks so much, Joey, and thank you, Jeff. So as they both just mentioned, I'm going to walk you through the steps for accessing both the grant and program plan sections of the portal and how recipients should complete these sections. And I'm also going to be weaving in some tips and best practices so that you all know a few of the things that Treasury is going to be looking for while we go through the review process. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Just a bit of background, the grant plan, just to clarify, is the term we're using for the overarching proposal that you will submit to describe how you plan to generally use CPF funds. And I'm going to go into a bit more detail later in the presentation, but the grant plan includes the following: the executive summary, the allocation table, and the program plans. And then a few other top-level things that recipients should keep in mind when completing their grant and program plans. So first, recipients must or may submit additional documentation they feel is necessary to respond to questions that we ask throughout the program plan and grant plans. Treasury will consider any relevant documentations that are submitted by a recipient. Second, throughout the entire grant performance period, which is March 15th, 2021 to December 31st, 2026, recipients are responsible for updating their SAM.gov information. So you all are responsible for making sure all identification numbers such as DUNS, the taxpayer identification number or TIN, are active and up to date. And if it's not up to date, recipients may experience delays in the grant or program plan reviews or funding. So please make sure that you review those. Those are very important. And additionally, we may share some information from a recipient's CPF grant application, their grant plan or program plan publicly. For example, this may include the allocation table or program descriptions. And finally, last thing on the slide, all CPF grant plans, including at least one program plan, must be submitted by September 24th, 2022. Perfect. Go back to the ID.me slide, please. Thank you. So as I mentioned, I'm going to walk you step by step through the grant and program plan submission process. We are recording this webinar so that if, for example, you all decide to submit 2 program plans tomorrow and then 1 in July, but you need reminders, you'll be able to come back to this webinar and review the step-by-steps that we go through. So first, to create a grant plan in the portal, you're going to sign in through ID.me, which is what you see on the screen. And then you're going to go to the state, local, and tribal support card on the Treasury page. As a reminder, this is the same place that you went to complete your application. Next slide. So after that, you'll be taken to the state and local portal homepage. And in order to submit a grant or program plan, you will click on the My Submissions button, and we've highlighted this on the slide for you with the red arrow. Next slide. You will then be taken to the submission page. Some recipients may see several more submissions, especially if you've applied to maybe the state and local fiscal recovery fund or any other of Treasury's recovery programs. You'll see a lot more on here. So you will scroll down to the section that has the header CPF grant/program plans. And this is where we're going to be for most of this process, is just in this little section. And you can see here, before we've gotten started on a grant plan, the status of it says not submitted. And there are 3 statuses you'll see throughout this program that let you know where you're at in the process. So right now we have not started or submitted a grant plan. So it's going to say not submitted. When you have submitted the grant plan, it's going to change to needs program plan. And then once you have completed and submitted at least one program plan, it's going to change to say submitted, just so that you know where you're at in the process. So next slide. So this just shows that when you're ready to start your grant plan, you're just going to click on where we've circled where it says grant plan under the edit/view column. Next slide, please. Once you begin your grant plan, this is the first thing that's going to come up. It's all on the same page. So all you need to do to get to the different sections is scroll down. But as a reminder, the grant plan includes the executive summary, which provides details about how you will use funds and other measures for assessing performance. It also includes the allocation table, which breaks down the funding by each program plan. And then the last part of the grant plan is the program plan, which provides detailed information about each program identified in the allocation table. So keep in mind, we've had a few questions on this, so I'll clarify real quick. You can submit more than one program plan, and you can also submit program plans at different times up until the deadline of September. Treasury will review program plans as they are submitted, not when they're all submitted and you're done submitting. So if you submit 2 tomorrow, like I said, and then 1 in July, we will start reviewing the completed ones first. And next slide, please. Once you've scrolled past this, you're going to get to the executive summary. This is going to be submitted by, if you can see here, by either clicking upload files button or by dragging and dropping the file into the section, whichever is easiest for you. And once the summary is successfully uploaded, you may click where it says submit grant plan. If you scroll further down, recipients may request additional program administrative funds, and I'll touch on that momentarily. Next slide. But before we get to that, I'm just going to highlight some best practices and tips for the executive summary that we ask of all recipients. First, the executive summary should be uploaded as a PDF or some other non-editable document. This maintains the integrity of the plans and ensures that the proposed use of funds that you submit and that we review is not altered in any way along the process. The executive summary is an overview, but shouldn't be longer than 2 pages in length. And finally on the slide is, please provide a paragraph for each of the following. So the objectives, a brief narrative explaining your allocation table, and a description of the following questions. So what processes did you undertake and factors did you consider in identifying critical needs? How was public participation? How did that inform your approach to investing your funds? And then how was equity considered when investing your funds as well? And as you fill out that executive summary, we encourage you to insert headers indicating each of the sections I mentioned, and this will allow Treasury to have a clear understanding of the summary when we are reviewing it. So this page is to briefly go over program administrative funds. So as I just mentioned, if you scroll past the executive summary, you'll get to the bottom of the page where it says program administrative funds. This is especially relevant for those recipients who did not initially request the administrative fund amount of 5%. And this slide also provides an overview of program administrative costs and clarifies a few differences between those costs and project costs. So generally, Treasury expects recipients to incur costs related to the administration of the CPF award in a centralized fashion, instead of carrying out a number of independent projects. This is why you all will receive the requested program administrative funds once the grant agreement is executed and before you receive your individual funds for different programs and projects. Quickly going over the 2 differences. So program administrative costs can include, but are not limited to, costs associated with completing the CPF application, the grant plan, and program plans, costs related to administering the grant or individual programs, and developing and implementing subawards. For project costs, these are associated with carrying out individual projects, and these include, but again are not limited to, design and engineering assessments for a project and construction services and materials. Project costs, however, should be consistent with the program plans that you all submit to Treasury, and access to these funds is contingent on our review and approval of the program plans. Finally, recategorization of costs should not occur except to resolve errors. And our recent FAQ delves a bit more into the topic of program administrative funds. So we encourage you to review that document, and you may reach out to one of your CPF points of contact with any questions that you have, because I know it's a little tricky there. So this slide is how we are going to go back to create a program plan. So the steps I just walked you through were how we were going to fill out the grant plan, and we hit submit under the executive summary. So as you can see on this slide, the status is now needs program plan. And that tells us that we have submitted the grant plan And now we're going to start on the last part of that. So as we have circled here, you're going to click create additional program plan. And these, just a clarifying thing, the program plan is different than the grant plan in that it's more specific to each proposed use of funds. And they also automatically populate the allocation table, and I'll get into that in just a moment. So next slide, please. So this is what you will see at the very beginning of your program plan. There are 4 sections. This first is just a basic user instructions, and to move on, you're just going to click next. This is section 2. This is the main page that's going to populate the allocation table that we all keep talking about. So on this section, you're going to be asked to identify the use code that best fits your proposed use of funds. And we've provided a list here of the presumptively eligible uses, which Joey just touched on, which was broadband infrastructure projects, digital connectivity technology projects, and multi-purpose community facilities. Proposed uses, however, that do not fit into those 3 categories may be submitted as use code type 2, which is other, and these will be reviewed on a case-by-case basis by Treasury. Additionally, program plans with costs incurred between March 15th, 2021 and prior to the execution of the grant agreements are required to submit a pre-award cost annex, and that annex can be found in the next section in the use code questionnaires. So once you fill all of this out, you will click next to go on to section 3. But prior to that, on the next slide, I'm going to show you, once you submit your program plans and it fills out, how it's going to look not only on the submission page, but also on the allocation table. So this is where you're going to go back to that main submission page I keep talking about. And you can now see I have walked you through completing a grant plan, and skipping ahead a little bit, we completed 3 different program plans. So I have broadband, digital devices or digital connectivity projects, and multi-purpose community facilities. What I'm going to do in order to download a PDF of the allocation table at any time in the portal is I'm going to select that little download button that we have highlighted there. And if you go to the next slide, it will show you what the overview is going to be. So as a reminder, this all automatically populates as you submit your program plan, specifically section 2. That's what fills this part out. So feel free to come back and download this and check and make sure from a high level that everything is properly filled out as you go through, because this is something else we're also going to be looking through. And so next slide. We are now going to move on to section 3 of the program plans. So this goes more into the use codes. So on this slide, you're going to choose the use code that you just used for section 2, and you're going to download that template, and you're going to fill it out and answer the questions. And we're going to go into what that looks like in just a moment. But once you fill that out, you'll save it, and you'll, similar to the other sections, you'll upload it here, clicking either the upload files, or you can drag and drop these files here. And if you look at the bottom, you notice at any time you can save this information and come back, or you can just click next to move on to the next one. And next slide, please. So we're going to go into examples, and I'm going to weave in some tips about each of these types of projects while we go over this. This is use code 1A, so broadband projects. So some things I want to remind you all if you end up submitting broadband infrastructure projects, just to be aware of. So number 1, be specific, please. CPF investments in broadband must meet specific requirements to be eligible. For example, as Joey mentioned, broadband services must reliably meet or exceed the symmetrical download speeds of 100 by 100. If it would be impracticable because of, for example, geography, topography, or excessive cost, you must provide a detailed explanation for why, but it also must be then designed to reliably meet or exceed speeds of 100 by 20. And it also needs to be scalable to 100 by 100 symmetrical in the future. So that's something to keep in mind of when you enter these questions, is to be specific. Another example is that recipients must fully explain how the broadband investment will be affordable to their target markets in the proposed service areas. So you need to provide a detailed description of your process for considering affordability. In short, we just ask that you be as detailed as possible in your responses and provide us with any of the information that you have available, so that we can spend less time going back to you for clarifications and more time actually reviewing the use code questionnaires that you fill in or fill out. So if you could go to the next slide, please. quickly just going over digital connectivity technology projects. If you were to do one of these, similar to broadband, we just ask that you be detailed when answering these questions. And then a few reminders for these technology projects. So one, permitted devices include, but are not limited to, as always, laptops, tablets, and desktop personal computers. This can be for distribution to members of the public through short or long-term loan programs, or to be made available for use in public facilities. Next, the equipment must be installed as part of a public Wi-Fi infrastructure. And then ownership of the equipment must be maintained by recipient or subrecipient. So now going to the multipurpose community facility, which is use code 1C, and the last of our presumptively eligible uses. Recipients need to answer all of these questions on this template to the best of their ability and provide as much detail as I've said. And Treasury's main reminder for this is that these proposed projects must be designed to jointly and directly enable work, education, and health monitoring. So you need to explain how the proposed project enables all three, and please do clarify how it enables work, education, and health monitoring whenever you respond. So the next slide, please, is our last questionnaire template, is the other use code. So this is for a proposed use that is not presumptively eligible and will be reviewed by us on a case-by-case basis. Similar to all of the other use funds, please be specific into how the program that you're proposing fits into the proposed use of all of our funds and fits within the parameters of our guidance. Next slide. And finally, after we go through all of this work and you filled all of this out and uploaded it, we're getting to section 4 of the certification page. So as an important note, whenever you enter the full name of the person submitting or who has filled this out, it does not need to be the designated official. So it can be, but it also may be in an application point of contact or additional contacts that you all listed. They also may fill their name out and then check for errors and submit program plans. So that is how you finalize those program plans. So next slide. This is the last slide that I have for you all, and it is just some reminders and some best practices about the program plans as you go through and fill these out. So number one, these program plans do not need to be submitted all at once. I've said that a few times, but just to reiterate, you can submit 2 tomorrow, 1 next week, and just we will review them on a rolling basis. You will also be able to revise portions of these program plans in the submission portals. In order to reach out, or in order to do that, you should reach out to your Treasury point of contact to start this process. And it's important that any changes that you want to make be made in a timely manner so that everything is up to date for reporting purposes. One final best practice I would like to mention, and that I have mentioned a few times before I pass it off to my colleague, is that all proposed uses of funds should jointly and directly enable work, education, and health monitoring in response to the public health emergency. So we encourage you to really keep this in mind throughout the whole process. And we also encourage you to review and reference the sample CPF grant plan, the updated FAQs, the guidance, and eventually when this webinar is posted, review this webinar as you submit these. And you can find all of this material on our website at treasury.gov/CPF. And with that, I am now going to turn it over to Jeremy to discuss payments. Thank you all so much. Jeremy, I believe you are muted.
There we go.
Well, we may have lost Jeremy there, so we'll continue on until he can sign back in. So what we wanted to cover here was—
Hi, Jeff.
Oh, there he is. Okay, I'll hand it back over to Jeremy. No problem.
Zoom mess up there. Sorry about that. It's good to see everyone, and sorry for the technical difficulties. And thanks also to Nicolette, Joey, and Jeff for the presentation earlier. So I'm going to walk you through the process for accessing funding. As you can see here, there's 3 main steps that you need to complete, and many of you have already started working through this process. And you may be familiar with these steps already, but hopefully this presentation can answer some questions you may have had. The first step is obviously to sign your grant agreement. Most of you have done that already. And once you sign it and Treasury countersigns, you'll be able to download a copy of it at any time. To do this, you log into the Treasury portal, and hopefully this screenshot that's on the page now looks pretty familiar to you. You click on the circled download button there, and the final signed agreement will appear as one of the options to download. And the next step is going to be to receive funding approval, and then finally you need to request a drawdown. And I'll explain how to do those two things now. Jeff will take that. There we go. Okay, so as you know, we use two main categories for CPF funds: funds used for program administrative costs and funds used for project costs. You log into the Treasury portal, find your grant plan. Okay, all of you have one in the portal, and click on the link, and then scroll down. So what you're seeing here, there's the grant plan. You click on grant plan, you scroll all the way down. So you're going to pass the executive summary material that Nicolette talked about. Keep scrolling, and you'll find this box. And at the very bottom of the page, you'll see the section. It shows the total amount of available administrative funds, how much Treasury has already approved, and how much you have already requested. And if you requested administrative funds in your original CPF application, in most cases, those funds are approved and will show in the appropriate line here. And you can request more admin funds up to the total available limit that's listed. Simply type the dollar amount in and click submit. It's the next slide. For project costs, this goes back to just what Nicolette was talking about in section 2 of your program plan. When a grant plan is approved, the funding for project costs will also be approved automatically. So I've circled the relevant box here. That's the amount that's going to be approved when we approve your program plan. Okay, now on to step 3, requesting a drawdown. Once you have received funding approval, so those either admin or program costs, project costs, you request a drawdown again. You log into the Treasury portal. This time you're going to click the View Request Payments button circled here, and you'll see it in the portal when you log in. Carefully review the information on the cash management ledger page that pulls up. I haven't put it all here in the screenshot, but this gives you an idea of what it looks like. You'll note the summary showing your total allocation, funds paid to date, and then again, scroll down and go ahead to the next slide. Next slide simulates scrolling down. So here we're showing the requesting a drawdown of program administrative funds. For the first box you come to as you scroll down, it's going to be the admin funds. We'll talk about project funds in a moment. Information here, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. You click request funds, you type in the amount that you need, make sure. One thing that you need to do is when you do request funds, please make sure that your drawdown requests are in accordance with any relevant laws and regulations, including but not limited to Subpart B of the Cash Management Improvement Act. Recipients are responsible for ensuring their own compliance. We'll check, but it's your responsibility as well. Once you submit a request for funds, we will review your payment request. We'll let you know if we have any questions. If everything looks good, you can expect payments typically within 10 business days, sometimes a little less, but typically it should be about 10 business days. You can log in here at any time to view the status of your payments. The status fields that you see here are actually the same ones that we have in our system. So it really is real time. And if you're looking at this and something just doesn't look right, or it feels like it's taking too long, or status is making you wonder what's going on, feel free to reach out to us. So now we'll keep scrolling down this cash management ledger page. And we get to the program plans. So this is where you request your project funds. This works exactly the same way as the admin funds, except you'll see the name of each approved program plan. And you'll need to request your drawdowns against specific plans here. Again, very self-explanatory. So that's the conclusion of my portion of the presentation, and I'm going to pass it back to Jeff and Mo, I think, to do some Q&A. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thank you, Jeremy. So yes, we're going to move on to the Q&A, and we received some questions from you all when you registered with the webinar, and then we have some other questions that we want to highlight from our recently released frequently asked questions. So I will start, and Mo will help me answer some of these questions. First question we have is, and we just want to make sure this is clear with you all. I know we covered this, but Mo, what is the difference between a grant plan and a program plan?
A great first question to start with. Thanks, Jeff. And like we said, hopefully we walked you through that with the step-by-step, and it now feels more clear, but I'll provide some additional details now. And of course, you can always reach out to your point of contact for additional answers. So the grant plan itself is the overarching plan you will submit to summarize how you plan to use your entire CPF grant. The grant plan contains the program plan in addition to the executive summary and the allocation table. Each recipient will only need to submit one grant plan. The program plans are different in that they are more specific to each proposed use of funds. Recipients should submit a program plan for each intended use of the CPF funds, meaning they may end up with several program plans, and that is the component that Nicolette was talking about with the templates.
Great, thanks, Mo. Next question is, when will CPF recipients have access to the grant funds?
Another great question. And as Jeff and Joey mentioned before, the program administrative funds will be made available once the recipient has signed the grant agreement and Treasury has countersigned, making the grant agreement executed. So for many of you, that is today. You are able to log onto the submission portal, and you'll see some instructions about how to request those funds. As for the CPF grant funds that are going to be used for specific programs, those will be made available to states, territories, and freely associated states once a grant plan and at least one program plan is approved. Treasury will release these funds for the requested amount in the approved program plan. Any subsequent funds will be made available as program plans are submitted by the recipient and approved by Treasury on the rolling basis, as Nicolette mentioned before.
Great. We'll move on to our next question then. Does a recipient need to submit all of their program plans before Treasury begins the review process?
No. So again, recipients may submit program plans until September 24th of 2022, and Treasury will review those program plans as they are submitted, not all at once.
Thank you. And how detailed should recipients be when completing a use code questionnaire for a proposed use of funds? That would be the program plan. How detailed should they be?
Another really great question. So each use code questionnaire asks specific questions based on the type of project that you are proposing, and Treasury asks that you fully answer the questions and provide all rationale that went into the proposal. For example, if a state recipient would like to use their CPF grant award for broadband infrastructure in rural areas of the state, they would need to complete a use code 1A questionnaire that asks the recipient questions like, will a program deliver speeds of up to 100 symmetrical or higher? All CPF broadband projects should meet this requirement, as we've said. However, if it is impracticable because of geography, topography, etc., then the recipient would select no, and in that next session, fully explain the reasoning as to why you cannot meet that criteria. We ask that you provide any information that would help Treasury review this project and see that it is in fact impractical. If a recipient selects no and does not provide adequate information, then their plan will be held while Treasury reaches back out for additional information and clarification. In short, we encourage you all to read the questions thoroughly and answer them in a clear manner, making sure to provide the requested information. And Nicolette gave a lot of really great tips about how to label your responses to make it so that we can easily follow all the questions and answers that we have asked for.
Great, thanks, Mo. And we have a little bit of time, so I may go off script and ask you one other question that I know we got earlier, and that's about amending or editing your program plan after you've submitted. How do we do that? Can we do that?
Actually, I'm going to toss it over to Jeremy because this is a bit of a technical question on how exactly you go about amending or editing the submitted plan.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. You should definitely reach out to, especially if it has already been approved, you should reach out to your point of contact. And they'll be able to reopen your program plan for you to make the edit. We can do the same thing for your grant plan. And as Nicolette mentioned earlier, The allocation tables are automatically generated. So when you update your program plan, your allocation tables in your grant plan will flow automatically in that way. But you should be able to update anything as necessary. Of course, it will be subject to Treasury review and approval. Just let us know what you need and we'll reopen the website for you.
Great, that's very helpful. Thanks, Jeremy. I should also add to that you will be allowed to update or amend your grant or program plans until the deadline, September 24th. So just keep that in mind also. So we're going to close out today. I want to thank you all for joining
Jeff,
today's
can I
webinar.
just stop for 1 second? Can I stop you for 1 second? I want to thank Jeff,
of course,
Mo, Jeremy, Nicolette, Stephanie, Priya, and Chad for their very hard work at putting this webinar together. I'm sure all you can imagine how much work goes into one of these, and a huge kudos and thanks to the huge team led by you, Jeff, who made this happen.
Thanks, Joe. I appreciate that. And I think everyone watching will appreciate that we kept it to 40 minutes. I do want to thank you again for joining us. We hope the information will help you all in submitting eligible projects aimed at ensuring that all communities have access to high quality modern infrastructure needed to access critical services in communities. Again, a recording of the webinar will be posted on our webpage along with this slide deck. Thank you again for joining and have a great day.